Hello, this is Mr. Smith, also known as Teach Smith on YouTube, and this is Power on Conflict Poetry Lesson Exposure Part 1 for the week commencing the 22nd of June. This is primarily for Year 9 students at Reigate School, though of course other students are welcome to watch this video. So far in this conflict cluster we have had an introduction to the anthology, we have looked at both halves of Charge of the Light Brigade, and we will now be looking at the first half of Exposure. If you have not looked at the Charge of the Light Brigade videos, I encourage you to do so, as I will be referencing back to the Charge of the Light Brigade whilst discussing Exposure. So Exposure, the main messages of the poem. There are of course other messages and other symbols in the poem, however I believe these to be the most pertinent, the most useful at this time. So Owen portrays the weather as the true enemy, the true killer of soldiers in the trenches. People at the time, remember, would not have known this. In history, I know that you talk about the trenches and the conditions in the trenches. It's very, very important to understand at this time that the public would not have understood this. Also, Owen exposes the futility, the pointlessness of World War I. So the title Exposure is very important, because essentially exposure to the weather, exposure is a condition where you are suffering due to overexposure to the weather, and he's also exposing a truth. Owen is exposing a truth. Now I just found this from Bite Size, and I think it was just important to pause and remind you of this. Context is important. Why? The context in which a poem was written can sometimes tell you more about its themes, message and meaning. Some questions you might ask include, are aspects of the poet's life reflected in the poem? This is very much true for Owen and Exposure. Is the time or the place in which it was written reflected in the poem? Again, it's very true because Owen is trying to tell us something, or trying to tell the public something that they did not realise before. Now, this is quite a lot of text on this screen. I'm not going to read it all out. I will allow you to do so. You may wish to pause this video at this point, but I'm going to pick out a few points. You may well know this from history, but due to the conditions in the trenches, due to the British soldiers not having the right kit, nowhere near the right kit as in clothing, and there were a lot of soldiers that had hypothermia, frostbite, trench foot, just awful conditions which could lead to the loss of limbs or even death. Owen at one point got trapped in essentially a shell hole in no man's land at one stage for 2 days. He wrote, "We were marooned in a frozen desert. There was not a sign of life on the horizon and 1,000 signs of death. The marvel is we did not all die of cold." So again, words from the man himself, words from Owen himself about the conditions they had to face. I'll read this final point. Owen used his writing to inform people back in Britain about the horrors of the war and in particular about life on the front line. The picture they painted contradicted, exposed the scenes of glory portrayed in the British press. So again, the British press, the propaganda they used would contradict or be contradicted by what Owen said. As you look at this picture, I'm just going to read the poem to you. Please make sure you have a copy of the poem in front of you. Our brains ache in the merciless iced east winds that knife us. Wearied we keep awake because the night is silent. Low drooping flares confuse our memory of the salient. Worried by silence, sentries whisper, curious, nervous. But nothing happens. Watching, we hear the mad gusts tugging on the wire, like twitching agonies of men among its brambles. Northward, incessantly, the flickering gunnery rumbles, far off like a dull rumour of some other war. What are we doing here? The poignant misery of dawn begins to grow. We only know war lasts, rain soaks, and clouds sag stormy. Dawn massing in the east, her melancholy army. Attacks once more in ranks on shivering ranks of grey. But nothing happens. Sudden successive flights of bullets streak the silence. Less deadly than the air that shudders black with snow, with sidelong flowing flakes that flock, pause and renew. We watch them wandering up and down the wind's nonchalance. But nothing happens. Pale flakes with fingering stealth come feeling for our faces. We cringe in holes, back on forgotten dreams, and stare, snow-dazed, deep into grassier ditches. So we drowse sun-dozed, littered with blossoms, trickling where the blackbird fusses. Is it that we are dying? Slowly our ghosts drag home, glimpsing the sunk fires, glozed with crusted dark red jewels. Crickets jingle there. For hours the innocent mice rejoice, the house is theirs. Shutters and doors all closed. On us the doors are closed. We turn back to our dying. Since we believe not otherwise can kind fires burn, nor ever suns smile true on child or field or fruit. For God's invincible spring, our love is made afraid. Therefore not loath we lie out here, therefore we're born, for love of God seems dying. Tonight this frost will fasten on this mud and us, shrivelling many hands, puckering foreheads crisp. The burying party, picks and shovels and shaking grasp, pause over half-known faces. All their eyes are ice, but nothing happens. So I just want you to think about what Owen is saying about the cold, about the weather. So this is the first stanza. I've emphasised the annotations. Again, please do have the poem in front of you to annotate. The first line, merciless iced east winds. So you have that list of three, merciless iced east. All of those three words emphasise the severity of the cold. It's non-stop and it's inescapable. Merciless, without mercy, without soulfulness, without any consideration. Winds from the east will always be particularly cold. And then that personification, nigh of us, seeking them out, an enemy to be feared, murderous, the pain as well, the pain of being stabbed, and the fatal nature of it as well, the fact that it might kill you. This wind is like being stabbed with a knife, or this wind is being stabbed with a knife. Now, we've got this rhyme or half rhyme, silent and salient. When you're on sentry watch, you'll be looking out across no man's land. It will be dark. You can't light too many lights for fear of snipers. The occasional artillery flares will go off in order to find targets. So like a firework almost will burst in the air, and you'll see the ground illuminated for a moment, and then it'll be dark again. And that is very confusing to your eye, to your mental picture of things, and the whole experience is very disorientating. And this half rhyme, silent and salient, emphasizes that confusion or highlights that confusion. They can't figure out what to focus on, and what they want to focus on keeps changing. The sentries are whispering, they're on edge, they're curious, they're nervous, but nothing happens. Constantly on edge, but no fighting. Again, this is the first reference back to Road to 600. Remember the refrain in Charge of the Light Brigade was Road to 600. Think about that as a contrast. In Charge of the Light Brigade there was action, there was something for the soldiers to do, tragic though it was. It felt like there was a purpose to it, at least at the time. But in Exposure, they just wait in the freezing cold, slowly dying. Again, the mad gusts tugging on the wire like twitching agonies of men. So the wind is constantly howling through the barbed wire. It's making a high whistling sound, or even a screaming sound. It's a very cruel sound, it'd be a very maddening sound to hear all the time, and to associate it with pain. The personal pain of that wind attacking you, essentially, but also it reminding you of the screams of dying men. And could it be that actually what you think is the wind screaming are men dying in no man's land? Remember, you'd have one line of trenches, you'd have a patch of ground in the middle, and you'd have the enemy line of trenches. And the barbed wire could catch you and hold you, and you could die on that barbed wire. And it's that confusion again. Is it the wind or is it the men? The actual sounds of battle that you would expect are off somewhere else. Again, this simile, a dull rumour, They're off somewhere else, and not only they're off somewhere else, it seems unimportant. It's a dull rumour. It doesn't concern them. They're only concerned with surviving the weather. That's what they need to be concerned about. And then the second reference back, or again, I'm not saying that Owen is directly referencing Charge of the Light Brigade. It's important to know that. What I'm saying is that he is addressing the general patriotic, positive view of war. The rhetorical question asks, what are we doing here? And it feels like a contrast to me to Theirs Not to Reason Why, that soldier's oath from Charge of the Light Brigade. He is a soldier, and he is asking why we're doing this. He's not just doing it and not thinking. What are we doing here? What is the point of just lying in a trench, freezing cold, perhaps losing fingers, losing toes, losing friends, and perhaps even losing your life? Essentially, almost this whole stanza is dedicated to the power of the weather. The weather's power, the weather is the enemy, the weather as an army. It feels inevitable and it feels inescapable. Normally, dawn, the rise of the sun, would bring people hope. It would warm you physically, and it would warm you mentally. It would make you feel like it's a new day. Hopefully things can get better. But things do not get better with the dawn. All it brings is a new storm. All it brings is more clouds, more misery, more hopelessness, more shivering. And then ranks and shivering ranks of grey. This is a very powerful metaphor because it works in two ways. The ranks on ranks of grey could just be endless amounts of clouds, endless lines of clouds seeming to appear one after the other without end. When you look at the clouds in the sky, they almost look like an army of clouds appearing without seeming to stop or seeming to break. Then also think about the men underneath. They are men in ranks. They're soldiers in ranks, in lines, and they're shivering in their grey uniforms, and the rain is pouring down on them. Remember, if you need to at any point, pause the video, go back, look at notes again, hear that section of the video again, so that you don't miss any notes. This first line shows how much actual fighting, actual shooting is a shock to the soldiers. It's not what normally happens. The normal actions of battle are not normal to them. Personification of the air itself is shuddering. The air itself is freezing with snow. And then black with snow almost feels like an oxymoron. Normally we'd expect the air to be white with snow. But there is so much snow, it's blocked out the light. And it is black with snow. And then that alliteration, flowing flakes that flock. It's a huge amount of flakes of snow. The size, and it's relentless. It never seems to end. And sidelong, it's hitting them sideways because of the wind. And then again, if that metaphor of a flock, it seems like it's an organised attack, much like the wind at the start of the poem. So overall, think about how much Owen has portrayed the weather as dangerous, as the enemy, as hurtful. So think about what I've said so far. Just a plenary again for you to think about, why would this vision of war be shocking to those back home? Remember, trench warfare had never gone on like this before. It's just something for you to think about. Thank you very much for watching Year 9. I hope this video has been helpful. This is Mr. Smith, also known as Teach Smith on YouTube.